Our remote participants in Burr Ridge and Coal Valley, I hope you are all having a good morning. I'm going to start by saying I hope you can all hear me, so let's just check in at our remote locations. Burr Ridge, can you guys hear us okay?
Yes.
Yes, good morning.
Excellent, thank you. Coal Valley, looks like we got a couple of people there.
We can hear you, thank you.
Is that you, Angela?
It is.
Awesome, good to see you. Hi, Kendall.
Hello, I'm currently here by myself, only to let you know that when folks get here, we will usher them in.
Gotcha. Thank you, Kendall. Okay, so I'll just briefly say that a couple months ago we offered a webinar from the Management Association, an attorney from the Management Association, to talk to members about sexual harassment from the angle of policy and sort of the legal perspective, and obviously that's important. But we thought it obviously equally important to hear from library staff that that perhaps live this every day or that are embedded in some way. And so we're really fortunate to have a couple people here with us today from Waukegan, Amanda Civitello and Katie Mclean, Waukegan, who have, now I think this started with you guys writing an article, right, for American libraries or public libraries, or do I have the timeline? Because I know you have.
We did a conversation starter at
That's right.
Session at ALA Annual in June 2017.
Gotcha. And I know they have gone on and spoken at one or two other conferences, have done a webinar, and then are going to be able to share with us today. So we're very fortunate to have them. Just a couple ground rules, obviously, is video conferencing. So we do encourage participation from our remote locations. I know that throughout the morning, they'll be asking for people here at Vernon and from our remote sites to share and discuss at your location amongst each other. Do ask for our remote sites to just remember to stay muted so that we're not picking up on side conversations and such. So I think with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Amanda and Katie, and I think they're gonna have people do some introductions and turn over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, go right ahead. As I strategically take myself out of you. Okay, awesome.
So, well, good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're really excited to be able to talk about this important topic with you, to get some feedback, share some ideas, and work through some questions that we hope you'll be able to bring back to your library and apply with your staff.
Yeah, real quickly, just to kind of introduce ourselves, my name is Katie Mclean. I am a reference assistant at the Waukegan Public Library, soon to be reference librarian in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm a frontline staff member. I've worked as a frontline staff member at Waukegan for over 6.5 years. And during that time, I have accumulated a large list of experiences, as I'm sure many of us have in our times at the library. And I kind of got started on this journey when I was talking with a couple of friends who weren't at the library. We were just talking about work and stresses and stuff like that. And I casually mentioned that we had been having just a ton of people coming in, and I was like, I feel like I'm being evaluated like a hunk of meat at the desk every day. Elevator eyes, hey sweetie, how you doing? Asking out on dates, just really creepy stuff. And saying, it's affecting me. It's affecting how I go out to the desk. It's affecting the way I dress, the way I present myself. And I just said this very casually, and they said, oh, you shouldn't have to put up with that. That's not normal. You should not have to deal with that. And it took that night. I did some kind of long, hard thinking, and I was like, "No, they're absolutely right. We shouldn't have to deal with that." And the next day, I went to my manager and I said, "Okay, we've got a problem. Let's talk about this." And then that went from library-wide discussions, security evaluations on how we handle these types of incidents, and then eventually kind of joining forces with Amanda on other projects. But then she said, hey, how about we talk at ALA about this? I think this is important. And it turns out that was absolutely the case.
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations, Katie. It's
Thank
the first
you.
time we get to say reference
Yeah.
librarian. So my name is Amanda Sotella. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at Waukegan Public Library. I have been with the library for almost 3 years now. And I kind of come at this from a different perspective because most of my work is behind the scenes. So the members of the public with whom I interact tend to be our vendors, our contractors, people who kind of tread that line between staff and public. So we get to see both sides of the story. And how we got started talking about this together was actually via Twitter. And that's what made us say, we need to do a session at ALA as part of the conversation starter thing, because even within our own organization, in different departments, we came at the topic via social media with each other. So we thought the time was right for to find a way to start having these discussions within our organizations and within the field. And we've been really gratified by the feedback that we've received and the input and ideas that we've heard from a lot of people. And we've incorporated all of that into the strategies we're hoping to share with you today. So, and just for a show of hands here in Vernon, are we mostly frontline staff or managers, administrators? Okay, cool.
Manager.
So,
Alrighty, so we've got something here for everybody, and hopefully our goal by the end is that you'll leave with a framework for talking about these issues at your library, for taking it to your staff, bringing it to your leadership team, helping your director to speak more specifically to the needs of the staff when working with the board. All right.
Yeah, we'll switch to slideshow. Perfect.
All right, so maybe you want to skip to the next one. Okay. So our contact information appears on this slide, but I think it also shows up at the end. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. If you want another copy of any of the materials we have, we'd be happy to answer those. So asking questions. One of the biggest pieces of feedback we got the first time we did this was that we didn't have a mechanism for people to ask anonymous questions. And that's really important because we're asking you to talk about something that's really personal and that really has an impact on you, and that's kind of hard to talk about. So we do have an option for you to ask anonymous questions. Because we're not using presenter mode, ignore the thing with the URL at the top of the screen. Just visit bit.ly/librarians2, and there's a Google form there, and you can ask an anonymous question via the form. We'll be monitoring it during the presentation. Mm-hmm. Just be sure if you want it to be anonymous, the form needs to be filled out when you're not logged into your Google account. So if you have a Google account, please log out before you do it. And the questions will be archived because it's a Google form. So questions will not be archived applies to the URL that we can't use for this presentation. So yeah, they will be archived, but they will be anonymous. So.
Did we want to talk about defining sexual harassment? How do you guys?
Do you think it's a...
sure. Yeah.
All right, so one of the things that we think is really great is that since August, September, the Me Too movement has really started a conversation around what sexual harassment is. But I think it's always great to get a baseline for each group to understand what is sexual harassment. So how do you guys define it? And we can chat here, and...
Anyone want to kick us off? It doesn't have to be a fully formed, perfectly functional definition. Just when you think sexual harassment, what comes to mind?
I think when somebody in a position of power makes comments or gestures that you feel uncomfortable with, or it doesn't, or anybody actually, it doesn't have to necessarily be somebody in power.
Yeah, the power dynamics definitely can come into play. It's very true.
Yeah, and I think that idea of what makes the person feel uncomfortable is really important because so often what seems to be sexual harassment to an onlooker may not feel that way to the person, or vice versa. You might have a coworker who says, "Oh, well, they didn't mean anything," but if it makes you feel uncomfortable, that's not good. Well, I think that's a pretty good working start because because one of the things that kind of spurred us on to to talk about it was this idea that we don't talk about this.
Yeah, and when we did our presentation at ALA, that was, I think, more true than it is now. I think we're seeing more conversation coming about in all different areas of life, whether it is just, existing as a person in the world or within the workplace, how it affects people of color, how it affects different organizations or different professions. But overall, there's still a lot of controversy or, really strong emotional reactions to this idea of sexual harassment. So we think it's really important to talk about it frankly and openly so that we can, start to find ideas about how we can address this. When we presented at ALA, before our presentation, we put out an anonymous Google Form survey. We had almost 175 librarians respond, which was staggering. We were not expecting nearly that many. And from the survey, 63% of people reported that they face sexual harassment from members of the public. So that's basically 2/3 of our participants.
And we should say that since we did our survey, which was only open for a week, it was something that we did kind of, we should get some input before we do this conversation starter session at ALA. And it was open for like a week.
Maybe two, but yeah,
maybe.
Not very long.
Not long at all. And it's been interesting to see in the surveys that have been conducted since that this number holds pretty true. There was a big survey that was conducted via Book Riot that had about double the responses we got. But the numbers were pretty consistent. And we should say that this 63% represents members of all different kinds of libraries, all different roles within the organization, and many people with at least 5+ years of experience. That was our biggest category.
The library literature review, initially there was not a whole lot. A few takeaways that I pulled when I was doing the background research for our first presentation. The idea that our position as librarians, as community educators and helpers, and our helpful, approachable demeanor may be misinterpreted by other people as signs of personal interest when it's not. We're just being friendly professionals. And it can also make it difficult for the librarian to speak out either to the patron or to management because their job is to help people. And are you helping someone if you say, I'm not going to help you because you're making me uncomfortable? It's a very fraught conversation to have with whether it's with the patron or with management. Virtual reference services can allow for more complicated interactions between patrons and librarians because you can't see the person. Intent or tone is poorly conveyed through, chat reference or email, or something along those lines. And then there was a quote from one of the resources we consulted where they said, I don't know any female librarian who hasn't been harassed or asked out while at work. And while this is anecdotal, I think, for me, I read that and I went, yep, pretty much. And I think a lot of people in the room here too will probably agree with that. Whether or not it has happened to you directly, you probably know someone at your library who has had issues like this. Since the Me Too movement and Time's Up, there have been more articles and conversations started, and specifically in terms of how this affects librarians. Like Amanda mentioned earlier, Kelly Jensen from Book Riot did a really long, it's a difficult to read article, but a very important article, State of Sexual Harassment in the Library. Another book writer, Katie McBride, wrote an article for Shonda Rhimes' website, Time's Up on Harassing Your Public Librarian. These are really, really good, powerful, well-written, articulate articles that I think, if nothing else, I would say give both of these articles a read. The links will be at the end of the presentation, both the URL and if you have digital access to this, the articles themselves on this slide are linked as well. But these were, I think, really, really important pieces that were written. So we wanted to make sure that we highlighted those as the conversation continues. So let's kind of kick it off, like going back a slide. Sexual Harassment 101. We'll kind of look at definitions and just kind of and how it affects different groups of people. We'll have Amanda kind of kick us off with our initial question. What is sexual harassment and how do you define it?
All right, so the reason why we started with this question is because this is how we started our conversation together. And we said, okay, well, when we're talking about sexual harassment at the library, what does it look like? Who does it come from? Because whenever you do staff development, you typically think of it as being between colleagues. And we are talking specifically from members of the public, whether they are patrons, contractors, vendors, that kind of thing. So we did some hunting for definitions. And this is the one that we like the best. It comes from UN Women, but we will put out a disclaimer at the very beginning that this applies to everybody. It's not just women. Men can be sexually harassed. People, all different gender identities can be sexually harassed, but we like this one the best. And the reason why we liked it is because they call out specific behaviors. So sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexually determined behavior, like physical contact, sexual remarks, showing pornography, making sexual demands, whether people talk about it or whether they do it to you. So we really like that specificity because these are all things that it's reasonable to encounter when you're working with the public.
Well, not reasonable, but
Well, not reasonable, but things that
you could encounter.
that you could encounter. The other thing that we liked about it is it talks about the impact on your people. It talks about the conduct being humiliating. Spells out that it's discriminatory. And it also addresses how this could affect her in the workplace. And again, it's not just her, it's everybody. And it says the words hostile working environment because for many people, if this behavior continues unchecked, this is a hostile working environment. And we're hoping to share some strategies to help turn that around today. But, you know, since it's worthwhile to see, well, what does the Civil Rights Act say? So sexual harassment is defined in the Civil Rights Act in Title VII as practices ranging from direct requests for sexual favors to workplace conditions that create a hostile environment for people of either gender, including same-sex harassment. The reason why we want to call that out there is because if you do have a staff member who identifies as LGBTQ, it doesn't really matter who's harassing them. It's always harassment if it makes them feel uncomfortable.
And I can actually, since our last time we did this, I can add an anecdote to that. Not in the context of an LGBTQ context, but I was working and I was helping a female patron at the desk, and she made a bizarre comment about my body, and she clearly meant it as a compliment. But I was very thrown. I was like, I don't know how to respond to that because I know it wasn't necessarily sexual in nature, but it made me intensely uncomfortable. And I'm thinking if someone walking by heard that, you know, that just kind of compounds that. So that's something that I was like, okay, note to self. This is going to be this might be a difficult situation. Let's talk about ways that we can address these things. But yeah, it can absolutely happen. It's not just between people of different gender identities.
And Katie's anecdote brings up a good point that we'll talk about later, which is third-party observers to sexual harassment and how they might have some feedback on situations where they're not actually involved. So we'll talk about that later.
So who's affected by sexual harassment? As we have mentioned several times, women are not the only targets of sexual harassment. They make up the largest percentage of people who experience it, but they are not at all the only group that experiences it. I have worked with a couple of male colleagues that have been harassed by women. We heard from someone at a previous presentation that one of their male coworkers was being harassed by a male patron who, was asking for his contact information, refused to be helped by anyone else, asking for his schedule, when's he going to be coming in, and it was getting very troublesome and unfortunately not responded to well by management. And then there are other, to move beyond gender, there are some studies that show that people of color experience a higher incidence of sexual harassment than their white colleagues. And we'll go into more detail with this on another slide, but race and ethnicity absolutely intersect with this idea of harassment and can make for even more complicated interactions.
And in a similar vein, studies show that LGBTQ people experience a higher incidence of sexual harassment than their straight and/or cisgender colleagues, which I think is something that we don't always talk about because other studies show that LGBTQ people are less likely to report these incidences of sexual harassment. The other special group that we'll talk about are our underage workers. One of the things that I think is really interesting for libraries in particular is that we employ teenagers who are in high school. They face sexual harassment, and one of the most interesting things for us in preparing this was learning what that looks like and how can we better protect our staff members who are underage. Did I see a question? No. Okay. So the big takeaways for us, at least, sexual harassment can happen to anybody. The experience is many layered for people of color and LGBTQ people. And for teens, there are special things that we need to look out for to make sure that we are serving them and keeping an eye out on our young people. We'll get to that.
To go in depth a little bit more, like I said, we want to go a little bit more in depth with these topics, especially for this slide. We're not people of color, and so we cannot speak directly to these experiences. But we wanted to make sure that we talk about this because it can be, like I said, it can be a very complicated experience. If someone's being sexually harassed based on their race or ethnicity, or if that comes into play, and especially in the field of librarianship, we are predominantly a white profession, which may make it even more difficult for our colleagues of color to come forward and speak about the issues that they have. People of color are frequently stereotyped and sexualized in different ways. These types of systemic issues may affect the frequency, the nature of the harassment that they experience. The perception of behaviors as sexually harassing may differ across cultural groups. What is acceptable in one cultural group may not be acceptable in another. Although at the same time, women of all different backgrounds can contend with cultural and generational expectations of their behavior and how they are treated. So even within their own communities, they may experience harassment or these gendered expectations based on how they that affect how they behave and how they present themselves in the world. And then the other important thing, like I mentioned, people of color and LGBTQ people report that they are less likely to be believed when reporting harassing behavior. So again, this is a really important issue that we need to make sure that even if we do not identify with that particular group, that we are aware of it and sensitive to it so that we can better help our colleagues who may identify with these groups.
All right, so what about LGBTQ people and sexual harassment? There's a couple points that we really want to highlight. First is that transgender and gender nonconforming individuals experience sexual harassment at a higher incidence. We know this is true, but we also know that it's underreported. Studies that have been conducted suggest intersection between transphobia and racism, which means that the systemic issues that Katie touched on before also impact LGBTQ people at a higher incidence. LGBTQ youth in particular are at risk for sexual harassment and violence. And this is a many-layered issue because LGBT youth are in the very, very uncomfortable position of having to come out if they want to report their harassment. So when you are working with your young people, putting them in a position where they have to raise the issue with you means that they might have to come out to you. And that makes it all the more difficult for them to actually address the issue. Sexual harassment for LGBTQ people may include derogatory remarks about their orientation, and that applies to people who identify as LGBT or not. That's something to keep in mind, that people can make comments about sexual orientation because they're assuming something about you, not because it's actually who you are, and that's not okay either. Finally, one point we want to make is that outing colleagues is never okay. And I say this as a member of the LGBTQ community. Outing colleagues is not cool. If you have a colleague who is expressing sexual harassment issues, they're talking with you about it, and their manager doesn't know, it's not your place to out them. So working with them, finding a way to discuss it, so that they're not outed when they don't want to be, when maybe they don't feel comfortable for whatever reason. But supporting them needs to take into account that other identity that they may or may not be comfortable to share with their managers.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the first kind of discussion portion of this, and are we going to have the different sites?
Yeah, I think we said that it would be best if each site kind of talked within their own group. So hopefully there's enough people for you to have a conversation with at your site. There are 2 breakout questions in the section, and then we'll switch to a break. We'll check in with the other sites after we've had our chat. So our first question, what are some behaviors you've noticed or seen reported at your library that could be considered sexual harassment? So really think about what you've heard from your team, what you've experienced yourself, or what you've seen if you're a director come through on your incident reports.
Okay. About how long do we want to give them to discuss?
I think if we want to get some feedback from the groups, maybe 5 minutes to talk and 5 minutes to give some feedback.
Sounds good. So we'll
question?
take 5 minutes. We will mute here so you don't hear us all talking, and then we'll come back in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, everything's on the slide in the breaks too.
Okay, we're going to bring it back here, and I guess we have another question we want people to discuss.
Yeah, and real quickly, we've got another slide for you to discuss in your groups, and then we'll come back and kind of discuss both of them at once.
Okay.
So here is the next question for you. Again, take a few minutes to discuss amongst yourselves, and then we'll reconvene.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go ahead and reconvene. Do you want to reach out to the remote sites first and then we give ours, or how do you want to do that?
So what we thought we'd do is kind of summarize conversations that we've had and hear from you guys. What did you guys talk about? So we had a number of interesting scenarios raised during our discussion of the first question. Specifically about women's bodies and the changes that we might make, whether we're pregnant, whether we are into body modification, that seem to invite comments from patrons. And patrons or other members of the public not understanding that just because you're pregnant, just because you have tattoos, doesn't mean that you have an invitation to talk to people, make comments about their body, suggest alternative forms of employment than the one you currently have. And that kind of liberty that people feel like they can take when they see that you are a public-facing employee really does have an impact on people and the work they do.
Absolutely. And then for the second question, where we asked, how does this behavior impact your ability or your colleagues' ability to do your jobs effectively? We had a lot of comments. If the behavior occurs, if you work in a small library or if it's late at night, you're not fully staffed, maybe you don't have a safety team that can respond to these issues, you may not have anyone that can step in at that moment and say, and like act as a buffer or get the person out of there. You may feel like you have to continue with the interaction because you physically do not have any support. You literally do not have enough bodies at the library to help you move this patron along. We talked about how what do you like, especially as a woman, the threat of physical violence is kind of omnipresent to different degrees when you're interacting with someone. And if you are at, if you're thinking about this, okay, if this person comes in and they do this, how am I going to respond? What if it escalates? What if he doesn't stop that? How am I, do I call the police? Do I leave the desk? Is he going to follow me? That type of stuff can be very, it's very mentally consuming, and then you have to switch gears when someone comes up to the desk with just a regular transaction question. You have to shift gears. It can be very mentally exhausting. It can be distracting. You may have to find yourself reorganizing different projects that you had planned for the day based on, well, there's this creepy person who's sitting over in the shelves staring at my pages. I'm going to have them work on a different project, even though that's not what I had intended. And also, questions about if you have a reporting procedure in place or a panic button, you may have it, but, you may be questioning yourself. Should I report this? Should I hit the panic button? Am I going to be supported if in the next day, if they find out that I hit the panic button? Is my administration going to support me 100%, or are they going to lecture me about the reasons why I shouldn't have done this? So there's a huge host of these elements that come into play, and that was just in a 5-minute discussion. So let's see, should we start with Burr Ridge?
Sure.
All right, Burr Ridge, if you guys have anything else that you would like to add to the conversation, feel free to turn on your mics and let us know.
Would anyone like to share?
Is our mic on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Something that we actually didn't have a chance to talk about, but I think relates to this, is when you have sexual misconduct by employees, where they may be having an inappropriate relationship with another staff person or whatever, and how that can affect staff morale and their level of comfort in their workplace. Because it's not harassment, but it is sort of related to sexual misconduct. And I'm wondering if other people have any experience with that, or if that frustrates them, or how you would handle it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not one that came up in our discussion, but yeah, absolutely, that can have a huge effect on morale and how you experience and how you experience these situations. Let's see, should we move to?
Paul Valley?
Yeah, Cole Valley, if either of you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Oh, just regarding behaviors we've noticed. I mean, there's the creepy staring for long periods of time, and what are you gonna do? If the patron isn't doing library business, they're just sitting there staring. Then we do ask them to move along. But we have had instances of nudity and masturbation and things of that nature, which are definitely legal. And we call the police. And then how does it impact our ability to do our jobs? Well, and mostly it's just being unproductive because we have to be so aware all the time of what's going on around us to get our work done that we're not getting our work done maybe as fast as we could. But there's also the instances where we've had staff who don't want to work at a certain location or during a certain shift because of the probability of a specific patron or even coworker being around at that time or happen to come in. And then our other big discussion really was around kind of a root problem where we have a lot of great measures in place for staff to report this with incident reports and, conversations, and hopefully they're feeling comfortable about it. But we have a hard time getting them to report it right away. It'll be, okay, this has been going on for 2 months, and, it'll be the first time I've heard about it or colleagues heard about it. And how do we get them to report it quicker, I guess? That was our end question.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be talking more in the presentation about reporting and kind of working with administration to hopefully create a culture where people feel comfortable reporting these instances. So that's definitely something we'll address later. It's an excellent point.
Do you guys have anything to add? No? All right, then maybe we'll take a 5-minute break because this was a lot of discussion and come back in a couple minutes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're coming out of break now.
So, welcome back, everybody. We were notified during the break that our Librarians 2 link is not working, and it is because, I just learned this, bit.ly links, you need to pay attention to the case, and I had no idea. So, if you go to bit.ly/librarians2 and capitalize the L and the T, you will get to the Google form. So, apologies, and now we all know.
Okay, so we'll move on to kind of recognizing harassing behaviors and talking about what this looks like in our library, whether it's towards staff, towards patrons, and that type of thing. So I will let Amanda kick us off.
Yeah, and one thing we do want to let you know is that the quotes that you see on these big title slides, those come from actual statements that were reported in our survey. So we kind of built it based on the feedback that we heard. Not everybody recognizes when they're being harassed, and that's true. So let's talk about it so that we all are on the same page and know what we're looking for. So there are, overall, 3 different kinds of sexual harassment that you can encounter: gender harassment, unwanted sexual attention, and sexual coercion. So, gender harassment is harassment based on the target's gender identity. So that could be comments, it could be too close behaviors, leaning over, trying to grab your arm. It could be asking for inappropriate material, whatever it is. If it's based on their gender identity, that's gender harassment, and it's a form of sexual harassment. Unwanted sexual attention, I think, comprises the bulk of what we've been talking about, at least here in Vernon today. That's when you receive comments or behaviors that are unwelcome, that make you feel uncomfortable, that have some kind of sexual innuendo to them, whether it's an out-and-out request, whether it's verbal, whether it's somebody reaching across the desk and touching you. If it's unwelcome, if it keeps going on, it is inappropriate and it's harassment. The last one, I think we were not surprised, but really dismayed to hear as many stories as we have about sexual coercion, about threats or bribes to coerce whoever the target is into performing some type of sexual activity. And that could be anything from, I think you need a boob job, to following somebody around the library, to making note of their schedule so they can try and ask them out, that kind of thing. It's all inappropriate. So it's kind of 3 different sides of the coin that we think cover pretty much the broad range of harassment you will encounter.
Yeah, but kind of the general form of it I like to use is, if it is unwelcome to you, it's harassment. Or at the very least, it's something that you should be allowed to address with them. Hey, that makes me uncomfortable. So you don't have to worry, does this fit neatly into this definition? Mm-hmm. If it's unwelcome to you and it's making you feel uncomfortable, then you should have every right to say something either to the person or to management or administration.
All right, so who can be a sexual harasser? So we've divvied this up because we are public-facing organizations into 2 categories. So you can face internal sexual harassment from people who are affiliated with your organization. So from your colleagues, your peers, or your supervisors. From contractors, people who you pay to do work at the library. Or your vendors, people who come in and do your vending machines or whatever. Your printing contracts. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is. And your volunteers. And I know that libraries are really good about background checking volunteers. It's just like their staff, except they're not compensated. So they're an internal person, even though they're members of the public, because you have those safeguards and that on-paper relationship with them.
And then externally, which we've been focusing the bulk of our attention on, are our patrons and our members of the public. Like Amanda mentioned, vendors, which can kind of
straddle both categories,
yeah,
depending on your relationship.
Also, colleagues from other organizations, even though it is kind of in a professional peer-to-peer context, because they are not part of the framework or the structure or the safeguards that your library has in place, we do consider those to be external forces, basically. And we have we've gotten questions before about addressing harassment within a library with employees, supervisor to employee, that type of thing, which is absolutely something that is a problem, should be addressed and should be taken very seriously. The reason why we have been focusing on patrons and members of the public, because there is a very unique dynamic that occurs when you are helping this patron. Even though you are the librarian, you are technically in a position of power by the nature of our jobs. If if the person you're trying to help starts making comments to you, and kind of exploiting the fact that by your professional nature, you probably are not going to, fly off the handle and start swearing and screaming at them. They're using that to their advantage, and it really skews the power dynamic. And I want to say it was Katie McBride's article that mentioned it, but she's like, you're being held hostage, basically, like where you feel like you can't escape, and by the nature of your job, you can't move away from that interaction. And we'll talk about techniques that allow you to kind of take some of that power back. And shift the power dynamic again, but it's such a unique relationship that just is not covered. So in case you were wondering why we're focusing on that, that is the reason, because it is a unique relationship that doesn't get talked about a lot in terms of these types of behaviors. So when it comes to recognizing harassing behaviors, we had someone from our survey say it is hard to tell the difference between harassment and mental illness. That is absolutely true, and it's not a topic that we're going to go through in depth in this presentation. But we have encouraged people, if you or someone you know is well equipped to speak about this topic, this would be an excellent way to continue the conversation in a new direction.
Yeah, and we would recommend, like we did, reaching out to your local health department. They are well trained on these issues, and they are frequently willing to provide no-cost support to other organizations who are looking for those types of trainings. The Lake County Health Department in our area has been sponsoring a number of these mental illness workshops, because there are so many social service organizations that want to understand the difference between behaviors that are concerning because they're inappropriate, and behaviors that are concerning because they could be signs of mental illness. And our health department in particular does a training for young adults as well as for adult individuals. So it's a really good way for your youth services people to understand what are the markers for kids versus maybe your adult services staff with adults. Yeah,
and I will also point out with another anecdote, one of the most jarring experiences I've ever had, I was at the circulation desk helping a patron. We were very busy. I was helping them with like a library card, and this other person who I knew, he was a regular, and we knew that he was likely incapacitated to some sort by mental illness, just based on his previous behavior. But he came up to the desk, bypassed the line, came up to the desk, stuck his phone in my face, and took a picture of me, and then walked away. And I cannot tell you how violating that felt. I was not able to get off the desk because we were so busy. By the time, I was like 45 minutes later, by the time my replacement came to the desk, I was practically running back to my office in tears. I was so freaked out. And even though I knew that the person probably was either did not have the proper medication or there were other things going on in that situation, it was still a situation that I reported, because there are differences in how we might handle those types of transactions, but the fact of the matter is that was not appropriate behavior at all. And even if someone is suffering from mental illness, we need to document these behaviors so that we can figure out how to proceed moving forward. So basically, it's not, no one should be saying that mental illness is a pass. It just may dictate how you respond to the situation. But I just wanted to mention that. Moving on, though, recognizing harassing behaviors. We pulled this from, I'm trying to read the slide, American Association of University Women. And this is kind of corporate lingo for harassing behaviors, but it gives a broad idea of what these types of behaviors could look like. So, like we've mentioned before, unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual activity, direct or indirect threats, innuendos, comments, jokes, quid pro quo. I will do this thing that you need if you do this for me. Whether to whatever degree that other thing may be. Attempted or completed sexual assault. That's probably that's the most intense behavior on here. It can be displaying pornography. It can be gestures, comments, sexually charged comments, jokes, stuff along those lines. And when we were first putting together our presentation, I was like, okay, these are good behaviors to know, but I'm like, what does that look like in the library? Like, this is kind of very general corporate speak. So I put together my own list of what this behavior looks like in the library. And when we did this at ALA, I told everyone to look a minute at this slide and raise your hand if you've experienced anything along these lines. And all 80 to 100 people in the room raised their hands immediately. And I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. So this can be, a lot of these behaviors may seem a little bit more innocuous, but, they still fall on that spectrum of inappropriate, unwelcome, or harassing behaviors. Referring to someone as baby, sweetie, gorgeous, staring. I've had people, if I'm wearing my name tag, I've had men make a real point of staring at my name tag, and I'm like, you're not looking at my name tag. Asking for their a staff member's contact information or schedule, following them into the stacks where they know they're going to be isolated, taking photos of a staff member without their permission. Like I mentioned, that was also not the first time that has happened to me. Making inappropriate or suggestive comments about a staff member's appearance. We've talked about that as well. Inquiring about a staff member's marital or relationship status. Like Amanda said, if I had a nickel for every time a patron asked me if I was single, if I was married, if I was taken, if I belonged to someone, that one was my favorite. I wouldn't be doing this right now. I would have retired early. So this is just a small sampling of the types of behaviors that you may experience. But I feel like putting it into these types of terms can kind of help us refocus what we think of as sexual harassment. A lot of us might think, oh, it's if someone, physically touches you. It's if someone makes a very clear sexual threat. It's if someone attempts to assault you. Those are all absolutely very serious behaviors, clearly, and need to be addressed. But this is a spectrum that we're talking about, and there are lots of different behaviors on that spectrum. And being able to recognize some of these behaviors is the first step in identifying what the person is doing and hopefully taking steps to address it. Identifying that something is happening that you don't like, and then finding steps to end that behavior.
And one thing we should note is that all of these things, most of the things on this list, can happen physically in the library, or it can happen virtually in virtual services, whether that is virtual reference services delivered via chat box on your website, whether it's via the forms that you have on your website where people know they're going to get in touch with a librarian, or whether it's via your social media. So I don't know if you are the person here who manages your social media, but one of the things that I pay attention to on a regular basis is check-ins at our library. I want to make sure that all of our check-ins are appropriate, that they don't mention any specific staff members. It's just part of the safety safeguarding that we do as a general rule in person. We check in with our staff to make sure that they're not encountering problem patrons. We check in with our social media and virtual services too. So one of the special groups that we want to talk about are our underage workers. It came up in a conversation that we had here at Vernon, and we really think that this is worth taking the time to really think through, because underage workers experience sexual harassment in different ways. The reason for that is because it's not just the patrons they interact at the library. It's whatever they're encountering at school that follows them to their place of work. You don't have control over what happens to them at school, but you do need to be aware that that stuff can travel with them via social media or in person when they come to work afterwards. So what does sexual harassment look like for teens? It could be being asked out even if they said no. People asking them to friend them on social media even if they say no. inappropriate touching, spreading sexual rumors about them, putting stuff on Facebook, Snapchat, stuff like that they know about that makes them uncomfortable, making comments about their bodies, their sexual orientation, like we talked about before, intimidation, anything like that. Teens experience not just at work, but also at school. So how do you spot that in your teens who may not be willing to talk about it because they might not be someone who is willing to say, that behavior makes me uncomfortable, please stop, I will get my manager. They're not, because they're young and this is their first job and they need to understand that they have that individual agency. So what should we be looking for? Kind of the signs you would look for if you were looking for an adult maybe who is underperforming, you want to understand why. Distracted performance or a decline in their work quality. Do you see a change in the kids? Like, did they used to be really bubbly when they come to work? Are they showing psychosomatic stress symptoms? Are they calling off with headaches, stomach aches? Are they kind of irritable when they come to work? What's going on where there might be a reason for it that they aren't willing to give you, to offer up on their own? Do you notice a drop in their self-esteem? Were they previously really confident to take on new tasks that you assign them, and now suddenly they kind of just want to stick to what they know? Do they maybe want to avoid certain spots in the library? And are they expressing negative emotions? So you'll notice that none of these is, I am observing my underage worker being sexually harassed. The reason for that, one of our colleagues here in Vernon brought up, is that oftentimes the kind of work that we're sending our underage staff to do, our pages to do, involves shelving materials in the stacks where you can't see them. And you know, I know that sight lines are super important, and certainly we tried to maximize sight lines during our renovation, but you can't see everything in the stacks. They're tall, they're shadowed. So you probably, if that's where you're sending your team workers, will not see the actual harassment. So it's kind of on the manager to raise the issue and say, hey, what's going on? Is something going on at school? To have that conversation, because kids might not necessarily have the words or the initiative to describe what's going on. You should also be aware of secluded spaces when you are assigning work. Is there a way to staff the space? Are your reference staff going to check in with walk up and down, that kind of thing.
Okay, so we have another set of discussion questions. We'll do the same thing where we'll mute the microphones so that everyone can have a chance to discuss. We have 4 different questions, so we might take a little bit longer to talk about these, and we'll go through these one by one, and so you guys can focus on one question at a time, not have to worry about remembering everything. But let's take a few minutes at all of the different sites to talk about when it comes to the workplace and your role at the library, your responsibilities at the library. What does safety mean to you? What is your definition? What does it entail? What do you need? And then we'll kind of break that down a little bit further with the following questions. So we'll just take a few minutes per question to talk about this, and then at the end of all 4 of them, we will reconvene just like we did last time. 3 questions? Yes, 3 questions. Okay, so we'll start with what does safety mean to you, and then we will come back on in a few minutes to move to the next one. Okay, so hopefully you had some time to kind of talk about this first question. We, on our end, we had kind of broke down into an interesting topic or discussion of camera coverage at the library for security cameras, who has access to them, what the purpose of security cameras are, when there's too many cameras in a particular area, like for example, a bunch of cameras monitoring the staff bathrooms. You have just kind of these issues of safety that come into play here. But we also talked about safety in a more general sense, meaning that you can focus on the minutia of your work without having to worry about what will I do if something happens, because you have policies and procedures in place, and everyone's trained on those to know what to do. We talked about having a culture at the library or at your place of employment that really that supports this idea of staff safety, that encourages people to come forward, that makes sure that they have what they need, and encourages this kind of open discussion of what these issues could be. And I'm trying to read Amanda's notes to see if I'm missing anything.
But to make people feel like they can use those systems, to empower them to say, yes, I can determine for myself when I need to request support, when I need to use the reporting system and get that process going. That kind of staff empowerment is really key towards building the culture.
Mm-hmm. Essentially not prevent, we know we can't prevent bad stuff from happening, but we can make sure that we are that we're talking about the stuff, that we're trained, that we have, and that our management and administrative team can support us when we have these safety issues that come up. So we'll go to Burr Ridge. If you guys have anything that you'd like to add to the discussion?
Anyone have anything to share?
We just talked about clear communication and procedures, keeping your managers in the loop when things, we talked a little bit about, sometimes a lot of these situations start out kind of subtle or start out, we're not really sure what direction they're going, but if we can have documentation and incident reports and things like that, so that if things do escalate and other people get involved, we kind of have that paper trail. If ultimately steps have to be taken and someone needs to be removed, that we have those things in place. We talked about safety in terms of kind of what you described, that staff aren't, sitting at their desk kind of riddled with fear. What happens if the fire alarm goes off, or what happens if this happens, that they're regularly trained, and that new employees are onboarded so that they have those tools as well, so that people aren't in constant fear of kind of the what if situations throughout the course of their workday.
Yeah, I think you bring up an excellent point with the new employee onboarding, especially if you either work or manage a department that has a lot of turnover, which tends to be circulation, inventory, or your pages. Those are often the people that have probably the most contact with the public, or that are kind of they're part of your frontline facing staff. So I think that's important. It's not just about having one conversation about safety. It's making sure that it's ongoing and adapting and evolving, and that every new staff member who comes on is fully trained in that, so that everyone, no matter how long they've been at the library, feels that they know what to do in some of these circumstances. All right, and Cole Valley, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
The only thing that we wanted to add was that over the years, we have really taken great measures to develop a solid relationship with our police department, and also enlisted security personnel. So letting staff know that we really do care about safety measures, and that they're not alone. They not only have the management team, but they have security personnel and the police department to help them.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We are very fortunate that we have We have a fully staffed safety team of 3 people. We always have at least 1 safety member for every hour that the library is open. And I cannot tell you how much of a difference that has made. That it took this was not always the case. We went from 1 to 2, but then when we finally moved up to 3, we stopped noticing things like, oh, we're having more incidents in the morning because people know safety doesn't come in until 1 o'clock type of thing. And obviously that is not always something that a library can afford, or depending on the size of the library, it may not always be feasible. But I think it's something that if possible, should be prioritized. That's a very excellent point.
All right, so if we move along to the next question, we really want, just to set us up for the rest of our time together, we really want to consider what are our responsibilities to staff and to patrons. So to think about, how do we work together to support each other to create a welcoming environment for our patrons? Because the truth is that when a member of staff is being harassed by somebody, it makes it uncomfortable for the patrons in line behind them. And we think it pairs pretty well with the next question. So maybe we'll talk about these 2 together and then come back.
Yeah.
So think about your responsibilities to each other, but also how you respond to them. What do you do to create a safer environment for your staff and patrons?
All right, so we'll take a few minutes to discuss both of these questions in tandem, and then we'll come back again and reconvene. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you guys have had a chance to talk about those two different questions. I'll let Amanda summarize what we've talked about on our end, and then once again we'll go to the different sites and see what you guys have talked about.
Yeah, so we saw a lot of connections, I think, between the two questions, but in terms of responsibilities to staff and patrons, thinking about things like onboarding and our expectations of onboarding, how we teach people about the policies that are there to protect them and the expectations we set for their consistent application to different scenarios. Responsibility of managers to have those difficult conversations, to check in with your people, to be unafraid of addressing hard things is essential if you're going to lead a team effectively. But also balancing that with concern for your coworkers, understanding how does this impact the people I work with, and recognizing the value of addressing these issues with the offending patron, because if we are permissive in our space, that creates a broader issue of community culture, where it seems like that's okay to do in our community because it's not addressed in our library. If we take the perspective that that's not what we do in our library, we're addressing that behavior, preventing it from becoming a community issue. And as far as responding to safety issues, we talked about cameras, we talked about incident reporting, the benefits of having a safety team who are there to fulfill multiple functions, but who also advocate for staff so that they are not the ones having to address the situations all the time. Talking about communication and discretion so that we aren't putting staff members in an uncomfortable spot. And really looking at this as a spectrum and being consistent in the way that we think about it, talk about it, and apply our policies. So, Ridge, do you guys have anything to add?
Muted, if anyone has anything to share. I don't think, oh, go ahead.
One of the things we brought up is swift action to address the problem on the spot if you can, or as quickly as you can, rather than letting it build and build.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we touched on too, because that shows people that you are willing to address it in the moment and prevent it from spiraling further, repeating.
Yeah, and further emphasizing that there are consequences for that type of behavior.
Right.
Cole Valley, do you guys have anything to add?
Or not?
We've done a lot in the last few years, so installing security cameras, contracting with third-party security personnel. We communicate to our staff for these topics with staff meetings and at our managers' meetings. We also have a disaster and recovery team, which is comprised of various staff and administration. We meet annually at minimum to discuss those issues. And then same thing Burridge was kind of talking about. We require incident reports, and then we encourage reporting. We listen, follow up with questions, and investigate, and then take action when appropriate and necessary. And then again, we enlist our security personnel and the police to enforce whatever we need to enforce.
Yeah, excellent. Sounds like a really thorough process.
All right, so let's head back to the presentation. We have a couple more slides to go before we let you guys get another break.
Yeah, but this is like the really practical part of the presentation where we talk about strategies and things that you can use to address these situations, either with the patron, with your coworkers, management, administration, that type of thing. So the one of the quotes that we got from our initial survey: employees should feel safe and know that they are supported by managers. And on our end, we were we were talking briefly, my manager for the reference department has been absolutely fantastic in supporting us, knowing that, you know, when we mention these things that they are to be taken seriously. She has even gone to other departments, like when Amanda was first hired, our manager went to her and said, hey, we have these conversations about safety, especially in our department. Here's what we talk about. Here are some of the procedures we have in place. I want you to know that you can come to us if you have concerns. We are we want you to feel safe and supported here. And that has made a world of difference. When I first took this problem to the same manager a few years ago, what I think really helped everyone the most was having an immediate response from management and administration saying that this is a problem. We need to address this, and we need to take this 100% seriously, and we will 150% support you if you have any issues here. So once again, we kind of have our corporate lingo, and then we break it down into practical suggestions to use on the job. But these are best practices for addressing sexual harassment that we adapted from another site, including adapting a strong policy, training each employee on the policy so they're familiar with it, vigorously following and enforcing it, and then it kind of breaks down what the policy should include. So a few examples of that: clear explanation of prohibited conduct, including examples, so it's very clear what type of behavior you are referring to. Assurance that employees who make complaints or provide information will be protected against retaliation, whether that's another staff member, from a member of the public, a supervisor, whatever the case may be. And then also a clearly described complaint process that provides multiple accessible avenues of complaint, so that depending on the situation or who's involved, the person who is making the complaint has multiple options to them based on what is appropriate, what makes sense to them, what feels safe for them, and then explaining how that works.
Mm-hmm. You are also required to show assurance that you will protect the confidentiality of employees who raise these issues. So if harassment complaints are brought to the attention of HR, this is part of the confidential personnel information that we all need to keep track of. The complaint process needs to be prompt, thorough, and impartial. So whether that is on the internal side or the external side, those are the three things to keep in mind. And employees should also be assured that if it has determined that harassment occurs, that the employer will take immediate and appropriate corrective action. So these come from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The emphasis here is original. So these are the things that we really feel are important for all library staff to know, not just HR, because it's important to understand where are your rights as well as your responsibilities. So if HR has the responsibility to provide an investigation, it's on the employee to raise the issue. But this is kind of general because it's a little bit corporate. It's a little not library specific. So we have a couple slides that talk about library specific interventions that you can try, that you can role play with your team to start introducing them into your regular work.
Yeah, and this is a really great breakdown of what these best practices should look like, but it doesn't address how to respond in the moment, which I think most of us know, that feeling where you freeze and you have no idea what to say or do. So we have some phrases. Everyone should hopefully have gotten a handout that has some of these phrases on them.
Is the one with our logo at the top.
Yeah,
that we can't find.
Yeah. It says suggested language, how to help a coworker, and then on the back side there's a section on addressing harassing behaviors with your organization. So you can take this back with you to have some of those concrete examples. So what do those concrete examples look like? What to say in an uncomfortable situation. These are phrases that we have pulled from other sources. We have tested and used in real world examples. We have modified, used as appropriate. But these are just hopefully some guidelines that you will find helpful. Keeping it simple. Someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, are you married?" I go, "That's not appropriate." And honestly, with these phrases, the more you practice them, the more it becomes kind of like second nature. You don't have to think, "Oh God, am I going to say that's inappropriate?" Now, for me, that response just rolls right off the tongue. You don't even have to have a second thought about it. So that question is not appropriate. I don't answer questions about my personal life. That's not my name. My name is not Sweetie. My name is not Honey. Don't call me that again. Simple, direct, identifying the behavior, and emphasizing that that's not appropriate. That makes me uncomfortable. Or like Amanda mentioned previously, our new director, she said one of the phrases that they used at one of her previous libraries is, "We don't do that here," which I thought was fantastic. That is
You could say it to everything.
Yeah,
It doesn't even. She said it doesn't even matter if it makes sense. If they're doing something that makes you feel, we don't do that here, and move on. And it doesn't have to be specific.
Yeah, it's a very versatile phrase. So keep that one in your back pocket. Sometimes it can help to redirect conversation to the library, asking them, if they start asking personal or inappropriate questions, just looking at them pointedly and going, "Do you have a question about the library?" Or if they start asking, "Hey, hey, are you married? Hey, what are you doing after work?" Or you say, "That has no bearing on my ability to assist you here in the library. That has nothing to do with the business at hand. What is your question?" Bring in a third party. I have in a conversation with someone, I will ask them if they refuse to drop it. I say, "Would you like to speak to my manager about this? I'd be happy to get a member of our safety team over here to talk to you." And a lot of times that will nip it in the bud because they realize they do not want to talk to someone in a position of authority who may be able to, kick them out very quickly. And the other thing too, remove yourself from the situation. You can do this at any point in the conversation. Say, "I'm going to have someone else finish helping you." You don't have to give an explanation. Just say, "You know what, I'm going to have someone else finish." Or telling them, "Hey, if this continues, you'll be asked to leave the library." The other option, just remove yourself. You don't have to say anything. Look at them and walk away. These are, use as feels comfortable, as feels appropriate. Wash and rinse and repeat as needed. But these are great simple phrases that you can use, and the more you practice them, whether you're role playing with your coworkers or if you're like me where I do all my deep thinking in the shower, I have practiced so many times in my head in the shower going, "That's not appropriate. That's not appropriate," which doesn't make for a relaxing shower time, but it does help. So whatever feels comfortable to you. And then the other aspect to that too is what to actually do, the tone of voice that you use, your body language, that type of thing. That can also be very effective. If it feels comfortable, make eye contact. Just say, "Hey, you're not intimidating me." Keep your voice calm, level, and firm. It can be very easy to let to that panic or that confusion creep into your voice, or where you get angry and your voice raises. One thing that a former administrator taught me was the calmer and firmer and the lower you keep your voice, the more they have to stop talking in order to hear what you're saying. And that takes practice. That's another thing that you can role play. But, someone comes up to you, says something, look them in the eye and go, "That's not appropriate." That a lot of times will nip it in the bud. Refer to library guidelines or policies if necessary. That question goes against our library policy of harassment. Right here it says that we do not allow this. Having that backup, especially if you can pull out a paper copy, like if you have copies of your like library guidelines on hand, that's really helpful to give to the patron. We used to have a safety officer who, when we would report something to him, he would pull out a copy of that, highlight the specific guideline that they were breaking, and he'd go over to them and say, "Hey, we had this report. This is the policy that you are not abiding by with your behavior. If this continues, you'll be asked to leave the library." I'm like, it does not get more concrete than that. Once again, remove yourself from the situation. At any point, for any reason, at any time. You don't have to give an explanation. Get yourself out of there if you can, and if you feel safe and comfortable doing so. And as always, inform someone, whether it is a coworker that you are, someone else at the desk, your manager, another manager, a security officer. Let someone know so that you or someone else can begin a complaint process, whether it's filing an incident report, having someone talk to the patron or whatever, but making sure someone else knows. And the other kind of half of the coin is noticing, if you notice a coworker being harassed and you feel comfortable saying something, and the coworker, is not saying anything, but you notice they're very uncomfortable, it's okay, it can be okay to step in. I've done that a couple times with coworkers where someone was badgering her about her marital status, why she wasn't married yet, all that stuff, and I just leaned over the desk and I just said, "That's not appropriate." And then their attention turned to me and they got angry and I was interrupting a personal conversation. I'm like, "No, that's not appropriate. Just stop." You can, if you don't feel that that's the best option, ask your coworker if they would like someone else to step in. You can go up to them and it's like, "Hey, is everything okay here? Do you need me to take over for anything?" If you need to, get your coworker to a safe space. If it starts feeling aggressive, it can be as direct as, just saying, "Hey, do you need to get to the back room?" And then walking with them. The emergency phone call from another office works very well. So that's not the most direct, but it is very effective. Going, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I've got a big emergency all the way back." Yeah. And then they can leave the desk. And as always, informing a coworker, manager, security officer about the incident, informing the manager, and documenting the incident. These are so important.
So that idea of coworkers observing harassment of a fellow colleague raises the issue of third-party observers, which is really important to think about. What is a third-party observer? So a third-party observer is an individual who sees somebody else being harassed. That person could be another member of staff, it could be a patron, anyone who sees a situation that they think constitutes harassment has a right to make a report. Harassing behavior can be actions, gestures, words that makes the third party person feel uncomfortable. So to take Katie's example, if there's someone at the desk who is receiving continued personal inquiries about their marital status and there's someone online behind them, even if that staff member addresses it and nips it in the bud, that person, that patron waiting in line is a third-party observer. They can feel uncomfortable, and if they raise the issue, the same process should be followed as if the employee was making the complaint. So if a patron observes it, if an employee raises it, follow your same incident reporting status. So what do? Well, if you are frontline staff, report the behavior to your manager. Talk to your manager before addressing the issue with a colleague. And our HR manager who reviewed this slide felt really strongly about this point because this is a really difficult topic for people to talk about. And the third-party observer might be comfortable raising the issue. It doesn't necessarily mean the staff member is. So before you talk about it with your colleague, if you don't have that relationship, if you don't work that closely together, it's always good to talk to your manager. They can do it at a manager-to-manager level. And from there, it turns over to the managers and HR, calling a meeting to get their feedback, and setting the process in motion that way. So third-party observers, just pay attention to them because they do have a right to complain if something that they observe makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah. To use an example that I used while we were on break or in a discussion, recently within the last few weeks, I was helping someone in front of the reference desk, and a patron who everyone in my department recognizes and knows that he has an attachment to me, and he comes in and pretty regularly. And on this occasion, I was standing in front of the desk, he was standing nearby, and my coworker, who was trying to assist him, said that I did not notice this because I was ignoring him, but she said he was basically staring laser beams at my butt. Just his gaze, it was completely and utterly fixed on that. And that was making her really uncomfortable. So before mentioning it to me, she told a safety officer about the situation. And she said, either you go talk to him right now, or I'm kicking him out of the library, because that was really uncomfortable to watch. And then she told me about it, and then I was like, oh my gosh. But that would be kind of an example in action of that. All right. And then, as I have mentioned on a couple of slides, but I really truly want to emphasize this, it is okay to walk away. On a personal level, this has been a difficult lesson for me to learn. Even after doing a couple of these presentations and talking about this very candidly and openly with my colleagues at my library, I had a string of incidents that went for a couple of weeks and culminated in me, basically having a little mini nervous breakdown on my way home from work because of all the stress I had been under. And when I talked to my manager about it afterwards, I had to take a personal day the next day. And I explained the situation, and she said, I think what we need to have you do is just walk away. And I realized, even though I had been giving lip service to it, I had been talking about this, I hadn't been practicing it in my own experiences. And so I started to retrain my brain and saying it's okay to walk away. It doesn't matter what the situation is, whether you've addressed the behavior or not. It doesn't matter how far into the transaction you are with the patron, you can walk away at any point. You are allowed to do that. You're in no obligation to say something in every uncomfortable situation. I hope that these phrases will empower some of you to address it if you feel comfortable. There is a lot of power in taking control of the conversation back. It is extremely empowering, but not everyone feels comfortable doing that. It may not be possible in every situation. And understanding that it's okay you don't have to say something in every situation. You can remove yourself from the situation. You don't have to give an explanation. What's important is that you inform someone and you document the incident. If you have said something and the behavior continues, you are under no obligation to continue assisting this person. I told someone that they were being inappropriate, and they continued being inappropriate, and I still kept helping them. If I could go back and do it again, I would have said, no, you're being inappropriate. I'm not comfortable helping you anymore. Or just looking at them and then just walking away. Whatever would make sense. Again, the important thing is informing someone and documenting the incident so that you can begin the paperwork of possibly establishing a pattern of behavior that can lead to potentially more severe consequences if the behavior continues.
All right, so this is my favorite slide title of the whole thing. Because we had a question from a director who said, we start talking about this, our community is going to have a negative impression of us. They're going to think that we're saying bad things about them, that we are drawing negative conclusions about our patrons and our taxpayers, that we're saying that they do this behavior because we're talking about it as an organization. And basically it boiled down to, I don't want this to turn into a bad PR situation. So I say from the PR perspective, your people are not bad PR. It's really important to encourage your team to speak up about these issues. We can't be afraid of declining service, stepping away because of the potential for negative PR. I think it underscores a comment that was brought up earlier here in our discussion at Vernon about the importance of institutional support. We are really fortunate in that we've had a string of directors and assistant directors who have made it abundantly clear that this is important to them. Our previous director sent around an email, has this happened to you? I am behind you 150%, something like that. They were not afraid of talking about it. They were not afraid of letting staff know that they supported whatever action they took. If that action was stepping away, if that action was filing an incident report, that kind of a thing. So we can't be afraid of declining service because of that. We can't shy away from difficult topics because you don't want to risk a public discussion. But if you are afraid of a public discussion, what can you do to get ahead of it? If you have a crisis management team that gets together to talk about these issues, that's a great resource. You want to think about it from an external and an internal perspective. You can take some steps from a crisis PR perspective to get your communications in shape before this happens. You could draft some holding statements, some standard language that you use that you maybe run past your administrative team, that you get your board council to approve, whatever. So that if there is discussion, hey, your library is talking about sexual harassment, you have something ready to go. You don't have to worry about drafting it, wondering what is our response going to be, because you've already thought about it. And I always feel like from a crisis management perspective, having those materials ready to go can be really helpful, because it takes the onus off of you to, in the moment, draft a statement that defends why you're doing what you're doing. These issues are serious. You have an obligation to investigate these complaints when they're made. So thinking about it from a PR perspective, being aware of it, I think is really, really helpful. We had a couple scenarios that came up because I think making the connection between staff talking about it and PR is kind of confusing. The scenarios that were raised before we're closing because we're doing a training on sexual harassment for our staff development day. We are talking about it in our board meeting minutes. What if patron says we look bad because we're talking about this, or because an incident showed up, whatever. So there are ways that this can get to the public, but you can manage them. So how do you get an internal culture that's supportive of having these conversations and addressing these issues? How do you start the conversation with your administrative team? Overall, I think the biggest piece of advice we would have is to follow your organization's communication structure. In our library, that means you talk to your supervisor first, and from there, they determine the best path through the org chart for your issue. But what if your supervisor doesn't want to talk about it? Then that's an issue for HR. I know that some libraries don't have a dedicated HR professional. Sometimes it's the assistant director or the business office admin manager. And that can be a little difficult because your employees have to raise the issue with a staff member that they work with in different ways because that staff person is filling multiple hats. The most important thing is that thinking about what to say can be really helpful in saying it. These are difficult things to talk about because you're saying something that happened to me at work made me feel uncomfortable. Puts the staff person in an uncomfortable spot because they've got to specify the behavior that made them feel weird. They have to describe the impact that it's had on their work. So if they've been harassed by a patron and it's impacting their ability to talk to other patrons, to deliver great customer service, all of that, they're basically having to tell their supervisor that they haven't been doing all their job functions to the best of their ability. It might be because of this outside influence, but it's still something hard to say. So planning it out in advance, having a bullet point list of topics to talk about is really helpful. Asking for support in addressing it. Bringing ideas to administration. And setting expectations for everybody. I think that one of the things that we've heard just from discussions in other presentations has been that sometimes there's this tendency between frontline staff and administration to kind of talk past each other. And we represent those two sides of the coin, those two divisions, floor divisions of the library, where people kind of talk past each other. Being able to have those difficult discussions is really important. And from an administrative perspective, from our assistant director or our director, we're the ones who said we need to have this conversation so that the onus wasn't continually on staff members to bring it to them. They created a safe space and a forum for people to have these conversations. They set them at a time when, before the library was open, so that the maximum number of full-time staff could attend. I think it was paid time for part-timers, right? Who wanted to come in for it, if they came in for that night?
I think so, yeah.
I think it was paid time. So they facilitated people coming to these meetings, and doing so made it seem to staff that this was really important because they made a space and they made it accessible.
And then kind of sort of alluded to in one of the bullet points, I also wanted to say, if you're uncomfortable, sometimes bringing a group of coworkers who feel the same way can be really effective. It doesn't put the burden just on you. There is strength in numbers, and in an ideal world, we would all have supportive management and administrators, but that's not always the case. And we've heard some really horrendous horror stories from people who said, we went to our manager and our manager didn't take it seriously. They said, well, that's just, that's a testament to your good customer service that the person feels this way. It was bad. And in one case, someone at a presentation said finally their manager just refused to do anything about it. That she got a group of fellow coworkers, they sat down in the manager's office and said, either you do something about this or we're going to the police. But that this is continuing, which is a very extreme example, but she said it worked. They finally, it worked to the extent that they started implementing safety measures. But going in a group can really add a lot of strength behind what you're saying. It shouldn't have to be that way. The testament of one person should be enough for someone to say, hey, this is a problem. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So if you can utilize your coworkers as resources, do so. It can be very effective. And that comes to the end of our official presentation, although I would suggest before we do Q&A, maybe we
should take a break.
Yeah, so we've done a lot of some serious talking here. We have an activity that we'll talk about after we come back from the break, do any final Q&As. But yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. We deserve it.
All right.
Okay, so we are.
Yeah, I know Gus. He's really nice.
As we finish up our conversation here, hopefully everyone's come back from the break. I'm going to take a step back to give everyone an opportunity for if they have any questions or anything that that they're wondering about. We want to give you this time. As always, like we mentioned before, we have our contact information on the slides. We do also have the little mini Google form, the bit.ly that you can use for anonymous questions. Let's see.
I don't think we have anything.
Okay, we have not had any responses there, but we'll just keep it open to everyone right now. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask us, floor is open to you.
Okay, so I actually had kind of a situation. So the article from the Time's Up on harassing the public librarian, I actually shared that on our internal Yammer page.
Oh, cool.
It was really good, and I'm like, hey, let's share this thing. And there was exactly one response to this article. There's only one. And I'm going to read it because I want to make sure before I can describe where my issue was. This is the only one with it. A man told me last night as he passed the desk that I was the best part of his visit. His research in adult services had turned up information he was looking for. Slightly awkward, yeah, but only slightly. I am quite capable and feel good about not skewing the man who said the offensive words. And it's like, that was a thing where it kind of skewed what was going on, I felt a little bit. And I didn't know how to respond to it in any way.
Well, I think, and again, I'm having trouble remembering what I've said on the open mic to all sides and what I've said just here. But I think what's important to remember in this conversation is that everyone has different boundaries and different things of what makes them feel uncomfortable, whether it is just based on their personality, the relationship that they have with the person in question, the setting or the context in which the conversation is occurring. So, to have someone say, you're the best part of my visit because of X, Y, and Z, that is fine. Or, for a lot of people, I think that would be fine. That person does, we are not required to report something that does not make us personally feel uncomfortable. And I think that's some people's fear is that this focus on harassment is turning into okay, everything is inappropriate. And to that end, I would say if it made you feel good about your services, that's fantastic. I have male patrons that come in and say similar things. I appreciate those because it's a testament to my service and the work that I do. Sometimes it devolves into making comments about, yeah, and you're so gorgeous, and you do, and it's like, oh, you killed it. Yeah, I think, and what's, what the other thing to remember is that, what may, she may really like that, or really like those types of comments, like it coming from that particular person. There may be another staff member who has had interactions with that same person, or based on previous interactions with other people, that may make them feel uncomfortable. And that is also an equally valid response to a particular situation. It's a very individual thing, and I think it's important to make, all of these responses are valid. And that's why we're trying to offer a range of responses and reactions and things that you can do to hopefully accommodate as wide a variety of people and circumstances as possible.
Yeah, I think that's why our HR manager felt it was so important to mention third-party observers, because she said that from a human resources perspective, if something might not bother the person that it was said to, but it might bother a coworker, and for HR, that's just as valid. So I think, sometimes you just, people perceive the same situation a little differently.
Yeah, it can be, and it can be down to things like, tone of voice plays a part. And I have a coworker who is very adamant she does not like men commenting on what she's wearing. To me, it depends on the context, depends on who it is, depends on what they're saying. So for me, it's a little bit more of a gray area. But with her, if they say, hey, I like your dress, she'd be like, please don't talk about what I'm wearing. That's her preference, that's her comfort level, and that's her prerogative. That's her kind of comfort setting, basically. So yeah, I think it's your coworker who made the comment. I don't. I'm hopefully it would not. She feels supported and empowered by that statement. That feels good about what she does. That's fantastic. If someone else doesn't, that is equally valid. We're not trying to make one person or make everyone feel one way about a specific situation. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
For Rich, do you guys have any questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Coal Valley, do you guys have any questions?
Nope, we're good.
Okay.
All right. So then.
Oh, we did get one.
We did get a question. Hang on. So we got a question via the Google form. Do you consider this sexual harassment? Often we are confronted by patrons who specifically request assistance from male staff members and that they are more than capable of answering their questions. So I guess the situation is that you have a patron who comes in and insists on being helped by a particular male member of staff and won't be helped by female patrons. I would say we probably had instances of that.
Oh yeah, we have.
And I think it boils down to kind of the litmus test of, does this make you feel uncomfortable? Is it impacting your ability to do your job? And if the answer is yes, whether it's the male staff member who is being asked to step in or targeted or whatever, or it's one of the female staff members whose assistance is turned away, that could constitute harassment and should be something that gets reported via your library structure.
Yeah, and it's definitely gendered. So there is that element as well. But yeah, we've had a patron who, he would only, or he would respond best to male employees. He would refuse assistance from certain patrons, and he would wait around for someone else to come out and help him. But basically, we said, no, we're not calling this other person. Either we assist you now, or you carry on with your other library business. But we're not catering to that. We are here to help you. We're all capable of helping you. It's up to you whether you want to accept that help or not. So I think it's something in depth. And the other thing too, sexual harassment versus, there are all these different labels. If it's causing a problem, mention it. At the very least, I think it's somewhat worth a manager saying, they may not identify it as sexual harassment, but saying, hey, when you refuse to be helped by our staff members, it's causing an issue in our ability to assist you, and it's putting undue pressure on some of our other staff members because you say that they're the only ones who want to help you. That's not how we do things here. We don't do that here. At the very least, I think it would be worth someone saying something to the patron.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. So if we flip back to the presentation, we really wanted you to leave with tools that you could apply at your library to start the conversation, because one of the things that we've heard is that this is kind of a hard thing to talk about. So we've prepared an activity that I don't think we're not going to have time to go through quite the way we planned, so we'll talk about it so that you get the full background. But our hope is that this is a tool that you take back to your department, to your leadership team, and give it a shot, because it's a way to frame a discussion, and sometimes that's what you need. You need a framework to work within. So we are going to create a theory of action, and if this sounds familiar, it's because it's pretty common in the education world. They use it in their strategic planning to move from a student-centered perspective and where your goals are for your students' learning all the way back to administrative actions that are taken at the district level. And we thought that's really helpful because there are some libraries that are huge systems like a school district. But sometimes even within a one building organization, you can have a lot of divisions between your children's department does this, your adult services department does this, your teen services, whatever. All the parts don't necessarily talk together, even if you are geographically in the same spot. So we're going to adapt this framework that works well for education because it does a couple of things. It helps us analyze the situation from different angles and focus on the relationships between our stakeholders. It gives us an if-then statement that summarizes action and connects them together. So we're going to look at underlying assumptions, prioritize action steps, all to meet a particular goal. All right, so here's an example. If administrators advocate for strong policies, then managers will be able to apply them to work situations and staff will feel empowered and protected. And this was an example that we talked about before this, and it's been really interesting to hear how often policies have come up in our discussion today. So if you want to skip to the next one. But that wasn't that great of an example. So why was that not such a good example? Because it's vague. We didn't have specific action steps. It doesn't demonstrate how we connected our different stakeholders, our staff, our managers, and our administration. And it doesn't make a connection between the end result, which is what we all want. We want empowered staff who, when faced with sexual harassment, feel like they can address it in some way, whatever way makes sense for them, to the trigger action, which was strong policies. We just kind of linked them together in a sentence, and we didn't connect them. So, what is a better example? If administrators advocate for strong policies and set reasonable expectations for their application, then managers will be able to demonstrate how policy and procedure work together, and staff will feel empowered and protected, knowing that administration supports their actions via the process. At Waukegan, we call this understanding the policies and how they work for you, so that the policies facilitate the work that our team members are doing. This comes up a lot in my department because in PR, our media policy is something you're asked about constantly. Can I take pictures in the library? Can I have this event? This is something that we do pretty commonly, is train our staff to connect the policies to their work, so that when my community engagement coordinator is out in the world and people say, can I have a picture? She can refer back to the policy and say, well, actually at the library, you're entitled to, and move down the line. So why was this one better? This was better because it was specific. It connected our different stakeholder actions because it was specific. It also shows how the actions build relationships. So each thing kind of flowed from one to the other, and each action was reliant on the one that came before. Most of all, it includes a strategy. Our overarching strategy here was that policies protect and empower our staff, as well as tactics, which are the actions you take to accomplish the strategy. In this case, it was drafting strong policies from the start, training managers, and helping staff connect policies to their work. So that makes it better. Also, the part that makes it better is that we wrote it backwards. So if you remember me saying this from the beginning, you can click to the next one. You write it backwards because you start with the stakeholders that have your desired outcome. So our goal here in the time we've spent together today has been to take an outcome that we all want for our staff, for them to feel empowered, to have the tools that they need, whether that's policy, whether that's a handbook of phrases, training, whatever, to address these situations when they happen. The reason why we want to apply it in reasonable steps is because we want to connect everybody in the organization to the outcome. We don't want it to be a top-down thing that, well, we think this is what you should do, everybody fall in line and do it. If you work backwards, you prioritize based on what your end goal is. Okay, so that is the super quick one-on-one, what is a theory of action? There are some really, really good articles and resources online if you do some research. Most of them are from the education world, so you will need to kind of adapt. But I do think it's a really valid way of thinking about these kinds of issues. So we said that a good theory of action looks at actions and motivations, or if you are a fan of Simon Sinek and his viral TED Talk, then you know you should always start with why, right? That's what differentiates you. So if you flip to the second page of your handout packet, this is the stapled one, there's a brainstorming activity. And we've got 3 different categories here for our 3 stakeholders, our administrators, managers, and staff. Let's take a couple minutes just to brainstorm some of the first words that pop into your mind. How should our stakeholders feel once you've taken action? This is your why. This is why you're doing the work that you're doing.
Should we open it up to all locations, or should we open up to?
I think so.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so we won't turn off the microphones. If anyone from the remote sites, and honestly at this point you don't even have to identify yourself. Just if you have a brainstorming word, go ahead and shout it out, and I'll. You want me to keep a quick list behind
Yeah,
you?
you want to do that, and then we can put these in the document afterward and send that out via email.
Okay, so are we going to start with administration?
Or
no,
let's
staff.
start staff. So, how should your staff stakeholders feel once you've taken action? What is your end goal for your staff?
Safe.
Satisfied.
Empowered and satisfied.
Okay.
Supported.
Confident.
Any other ideas? I think that about sums it up. That's what we want our staff to be able to feel about themselves and their work once we're done with the process. What about managers? How do you want your sorry, Kate.
No, it's okay. We're just going to cover up the staff part for a little bit. Well, it'll come back, I promise.
I'll do administrators.
Okay.
So how should your managers feel? What do you want them to feel at the end of the process? How should this affect them in their work?
Satisfied.
Informed.
That's awesome.
I would say as a manager, I want to feel like an advocate. I want my staff to feel like I've got their back. Any other ideas?
Secure.
That's also supported.
Supported?
I was just going to say that.
All right. Now I'm going to right. What about administrators? So, and we should note, I know that there are a lot of libraries that don't have this 3-tiered thing. You might have a branch manager, you might have others. So if you decide to take this activity home to your library, you can totally adjust it. It doesn't have to be 3 categories. So if you're an administrator, how do you want to feel once you go through the hard work of going through this process and talking about these issues with your team?
Prepared. What was the other one?
Trusted.
Trusted. Okay. Excellent.
All right. Any other ideas?
Able to institute change.
Okay. I am writing fast and say change.
Okay.
We're on a time crunch. What about connected? Like connected to your team?
Yeah.
Like I feel like sometimes you can be in that ivory tower and not be in the trenches. Okay.
Knowledgeable.
Any other ideas? All right. So phase 2 is the how, right? So now we know our why. Our why is really important. It's all of these things here. Maybe we'll just like draw one.
Yeah, we're just, there we go.
All right. So the second question on your brainstorming page is what do you want them to do? This is your how. So when you do this at your library, you might have a strategy, kind of like we had a strategy of using the policies in our example. These are your tactics. These are your actions. So what actions could your staff take to move towards this? And this could be something like you could have retraining. You could have role plays. I don't know.
Don't they have to share the information?
Right.
How to communicate.
How to share information, communication.
Sorry, baby.
Nope, that's all right. Communicate well. Maybe we could have something on there, advocate for themselves. Or advocate for themselves and their coworkers.
Okay. What about managers? What do you think your managers could do? What are some action steps that they could take? Okay.
What was it?
Reevaluate policy. One of the things we talked about here at Vernon was look for opportunities for consistency. So be consistent across departments, which I think is big, especially if you're a big organization.
Communicate more. Team.
Survey staff.
What about offer training opportunities?
Yeah.
Get out into the public areas and observe more.
Interact with public?
Yeah, and observe.
I think even just verbally affirming that you understand that there's an issue and are going to do something about it.
What should we do? Like promise action or commit to
Action.
Action, yeah.
commit.
And one thing I just thought that we talked a lot about here for staff was following policy, especially as it relates to documentation. And, yeah. Any other ideas for managers? What are some things managers could do? This is just a pure brainstorm session, so if you have an idea, this is the part where you throw it out. When we get to the following pages that unfortunately we're not going to get to talk through, we're not going to get to do more than talk through, you'll see kind of how you align this with strategy. But all right, what about our administrators? What are some actions relative to this topic that administrators?
I was going to say, do you want me to scoot down?
Well, holding staff and patrons accountable, related to those policies.
We might be able to.
Coal Valley. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
That we administrators should, commit some resources to it, whatever's necessary to make sure that the place is safe. And also lead by example.
That's awesome.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, because I think one of the things we always think about when we budget is that where you spend your money is what's important to you. So sometimes committing those resources can be really important. By example. Okay.
I was going to say maybe also with administration, reevaluate policy.
Okay. And then I saw.
I think one thing administrators have to do is believe. Some administrators are men and don't always recognize.
Okay. I think that's definitely important.
We talked a lot about culture earlier, so this is sort of lead by example, but like committing to making it something that you actively talk about unprompted.
So culture change and communication. One of the things I think is really important for the director is to advocate to the board. I think if your governing board doesn't understand why this is important to your staff, you won't have that accountability throughout the organization. All right, any other ideas? All right, so we are getting a little tight on time. But if you notice down at the bottom, we had a Mad Libs brainstorm where we really wanted to see if we could come up with an if-then statement and then work our way through the whole process to come up with a better one. So because we are getting a little tight on time, I'm just going to walk you through the process so you can see how this could work for your organization. Okay. Oh, there's no slides for this part.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
These are just the okay. In your handout packet, you have pages, the 2 pages that follow the one we just worked on, right? Ask you specific questions to guide your discussion when you approach this with your staff. And I think we would definitely recommend talking through the questions first before you come up with a strategy. So before we had our strategy of using the policies, you might have a strategy of open communication or addressing issues in the moment. Whatever your strategy is, you can apply that when you do these questions. You'll notice that there's a space for bullet points at the bottom. The idea would be that your team would come up with different things to prioritize. And then once you have your steps for each of the stakeholder groups, you can then prioritize them by working backwards. So if you look at the very last page under prioritization, it says, our top priority for staff is, and then from there, you work backwards to find the steps in your brainstorming session for managers and then administration that make the most sense to reach this goal. You can repeat this for every action that you come up with. It doesn't just have to be one and then you're done. But the whole idea is that you pair actions together that make the most sense to be together. So if we were going to do it and we said, well, we want to, I don't want to do policy, but say we want our staff to feel comfortable knowing how to share info and actually doing it. And we said, that's our most important one. Well, then the manager action that might make the most sense to prioritize would be to survey staff so that we're hearing it, we're providing a forum for them to talk, and that would align with the believe staff action for administrators, because now we're providing them with the data that they need to see that it's an issue. So you can do that kind of working backwards. And then the last table there gives you the opportunity to say, here's the strategy, our overarching strategy, and then break it down into strategies and tactics for each of your stakeholder groups. And I'm sorry that is the really fast introduction to it. Send me an email if it doesn't make sense. I'd be happy to answer.
And then I'll also, our last slides that you guys should have access to, these are going back to the first time that we put together a presentation on this topic. We have expanded it since then. Amanda and I have also written, we wrote an article, let's see, I think we have it on there, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, there we go. No, we had it under your name, that's why. It's alphabetical. So we wrote an article for the Illinois Library Association magazine.
The Reporter,
The Reporter, and that was a few months ago, but we have a link to that article. It talks a lot about the same types of things that we talked about here. But these were all these were resources that we consulted when we pulled together the presentation, and resources that have come out since the first time we've presented. So we do keep updating this. We hope that these are useful for you, whether it's to start conversation or just even finding a way to articulate the types of experiences that you and your staff are having. We hope that you will find those useful, and we will continue to update it as this conversation progresses. And then the last thing that we wanted to mention, you should also have a single page handout that does not have our logo at the top of it. There are two parts to this. The top part is something for you to take back with you, to think about you as an individual, your role in the library, and what you personally will commit to or want to commit to in terms of addressing harassment in your library. It could be, we gave examples, but it could be, I will, if I feel comfortable doing so, I will address patrons in the moment. As a manager, I will advocate for my staff to do X, Y, and Z. As an administrator, I will start an organization-wide conversation about this. Whatever makes sense to you and your organization, we just want you to be able to kind of put that in writing and take it with you as kind of a concrete reminder of what you want to commit to address this. The bottom half is the most important part, and we'll ask that you complete this before you leave. So remote sites, we'll contact you later about getting the information to us. It's a survey, pretty typical, but we want to get an idea of, how we did. If there was something that was particularly helpful, we want to continue offering that when we do other presentations. If there are other topics that we did not touch on that you think would be particularly helpful to know more about, we would also like to know that information. So it should only take a few minutes to fill that out. Just rip off the bottom half however neatly you can, and then we will receive those from the facilitators at the different sites. And
I guess in closing, so here's our contact info. You can also reach out via the Google form. It stays live, and we do check in with it pretty frequently. Feel free to send either of us an email. We are always happy to hear feedback and ideas. And we just really appreciate you spending a morning with us, taking time to think about this important issue, because this is something that all library workers are facing. And by being willing to talk about it, you are really doing a great service to your coworkers and your team.
Yes.
So thank you.
And also, if you happen to be going to Reaching Forward next week, Amanda and I will be presenting on the same topic.
But kind of a different, frontline staff approach. So.
Yeah. So it will be, same kind of focus, but different content and how we present it. So if you did not get enough of our fantastic selves today, you can see us in a week at Reaching Forward.
All right, well, help me thank Amanda and Katie for their time and a lot of good information. Everybody got a handout here and remote sites, but if for whatever reason you didn't, let Louise or I know. But with that, I wish you all a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.